Apparently, putting up a garden fence makes you a public menace now? Just ask my neighbor Debbie, who acted like I built the Berlin Wall. I was just trying to keep critters out of my lettuce, and next thing I know, she's waving HOA rule books like she's on a courtroom drama. She even called 911 over a fence. You can't make this stuff up. What started as yard work turned into a full-blown suburban soap opera, with flyers, police, and more drama than a daytime TV marathon. Ever had a neighbor lose their mind over nothing? Leave a comment and tell me your wildest HOA story. I promise I've heard worse, probably. So here's the backstory. 6 months ago, I moved into this gorgeous suburban neighborhood in Ohio, thinking it would be the perfect place to expand my gardening content. My backyard became my outdoor studio, where I filmed everything from composting tutorials to seasonal planting guides. My garden was more than a hobby. It was my livelihood, my passion, and the heart of everything I created. I planned the garden carefully for both growth and content. Every bed had its place. Everything was going smoothly, until I decided to build a fence around my vegetable garden. It was made of reclaimed barn wood and added a rustic charm to the space, while protecting my crops from deer and other wildlife that had been nibbling on my carefully tended plants. Being the responsible homeowner that I am, I made sure to get all the proper permits before starting construction. I checked with the city, reviewed the neighborhood guidelines, and even measured everything twice to ensure I was well within property lines. I set up simple motion-activated cameras, new neighborhood, new precautions. They were just motion sensor cameras, nothing fancy, but soon they'd prove vital. It took me 3 weekends, and I documented every step. My subscribers loved it. The reclaimed wood had this gorgeous weathered patina, and the gate hung perfectly straight. I added a wooden sign, Claire's Garden, to make it feel truly mine. That's when Debbie Whitlow made her grand entrance into my life. Picture this. It's a beautiful Saturday morning. I'm out watering my tomatoes and planning my next video, when this woman comes marching across my yard like she owns the place. She looked like a Stepford wife on a mission, blonde, stiff, and radiating HOA rage. She planted herself like she was guarding Buckingham Palace, lips pursed, ready to fight Foley. "What exactly do you think you're doing here?" she demanded, gesturing at my fence like I'd just constructed a nuclear reactor in my backyard. I explained politely that I was just protecting my garden and that I had all the proper permits. I even offered to show her the paperwork, thinking maybe she was just concerned about property values or something reasonable like that. But Debbie wasn't interested in reasonable. "This fence completely ruins the aesthetic of our neighborhood," she declared. "We have standards here, and this rustic nonsense doesn't fit our vision." I tried to stay calm and explain that the fence was well within regulations and actually enhanced the property's charm, but Debbie cut me off mid-sentence. "You clearly don't understand how things work around here," she said, with this condescending smile that made my skin crawl. "I'm the president of the Homeowners Association, and I maintain the standards that keep our property values high. This fence is an eyesore, and it needs to come down." Now, here's the thing. I'd done my research before moving in, and I knew that joining the HOA was optional in this particular neighborhood. I'd specifically chosen not to join because I had heard horror stories about overzealous associations from friends in other areas. So I'd politely informed Debbie that since I wasn't a member of her HOA, her rules didn't apply to my property. That's when Debbie's mask really slipped. Her perfectly practiced smile vanished, and I saw something genuinely nasty flash in her eyes. "Oh, you're one of those people," she said, practically spitting the words. "A YouTube gardener who thinks she's special. Well, let me tell you something, honey. I've been living in this neighborhood for 10 years, and I won't let some outsider come in here and destroy everything we've worked to build." The way she said YouTube gardener made it sound like the most insulting thing she could think of. I could feel my patience starting to wear thin, but I managed to keep my voice level as I told her that my garden was legally compliant and wasn't going anywhere. After Debbie stomped off, muttering threats under her breath, I thought that would be the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. The very next day, I found professionally printed flyers in mailboxes throughout the neighborhood. The headline read, "Neighborhood Aesthetic Alert," and featured a photo of my fence with a big red circle and slash through it. The flyer described my garden fence as an eyesore that threatens our community's standards and urged residents to take action to preserve our neighborhood's character. I couldn't believe someone had actually gone to the trouble and expense of printing and distributing these things just because they didn't like my fence. But I wasn't about to be intimidated. If Debbie wanted to play games, I could play too. I decided to film a garden tour video that showcased my beautiful vegetables and, coincidentally, happened to pan across Debbie's yard in the background. Let me just say that her brown patchy lawn and plastic flamingo collection didn't exactly scream neighborhood standards. The internet didn't miss the irony. Comments like, "Your garden's a dream, hers, not so much," poured in. "That brown lawn in the background, though? Someone needs your gardening tips." Another comment read, "I can see why someone might be jealous of your beautiful space." The tension in the neighborhood was becoming palpable. Some neighbors seemed genuinely curious about my garden and would stop to chat when they saw me working outside, but others had clearly been influenced by Debbie's campaign and would avoid eye contact or cross to the other side of the street when they saw me coming. As I was reading through the latest batch of comments on my garden tour video, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. One of my longtime subscribers had written, "Wait, is this the same Debbie Whitlow from those HOA horror story videos? Girl, you're in for a ride." I immediately started searching online and found exactly what I was afraid of finding. Debbie had quite the reputation in local social media groups for her aggressive HOA tactics. This wasn't going to end well, and I had a sinking feeling that my little fence was just the beginning of something much bigger. The next morning, I decided to do some research on my new nemesis. What I found online made my stomach drop. Debbie Whitlow had quite the digital footprint, and none of it was good. Local neighborhood groups were full of stories about her heavy-handed HOA tactics. One post detailed how she'd forced a family to pay $7,000 for roof repairs before they could sell their house, only to have the property mysteriously end up in the hands of one of her close friends at a below-market price just 5 days later. In another thread discussed her habit of calling 911 for the most ridiculous non-emergencies. Apparently, she'd previously reported a neighbor for having the audacity to paint their front door navy blue instead of the approved beige color palette. I was still processing this information when I heard sirens coming down my street. My heart started racing as I realized they were getting closer and closer to my house. I looked out my front window and watched in absolute disbelief as a police cruiser pulled into my driveway. I couldn't believe it. I grabbed my screenshots and stepped out to greet whoever thought a fence was a federal crime. The officer who got out of the car was a tall, friendly-looking guy in his early 40s with graying temples and laugh lines around his eyes. His name tag read H. Morris, and something about his demeanor immediately put me at ease. "Good morning, ma'am," he said with a slight smile. "I'm Officer Hank Morris. I live just a few streets over, actually. I got a call about some kind of illegal construction happening at this address. Mind if I take a look at what's going on?" I could feel my face flushing with embarrassment and anger as I led him to my backyard. "Officer Morris, I can't believe someone actually called the police about my garden fence. I have all the permits right here." He glanced at the fence, nodded. "This looks perfectly legal." He handed me back my paperwork and leaned against the fence post, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Can I ask if this complaint came from a blonde woman in her late 30s who drives a white SUV with HOA stickers all over the back windshield?" I nodded, and Officer Morris let out a long sigh. "Debbie Whitlow," he said, shaking his head. "This is the 4th time this year she's called 911 for what amounts to neighborhood drama. Last month, she reported a family for having a dangerous gathering in their backyard. Turned out to be a 6-year-old's birthday party with 8 kids. The more Officer Morris talked, the more I realized just how deep Debbie's pattern of harassment went. "She's got this thing about controlling every aspect of the neighborhood," he continued. "I've been living here for 15 years, and I've watched her drive out at least 3 families with her constant complaints and HOA harassment. There was this one situation where she forced a young couple to spend $7,000 on roof repairs before they could sell their house. They went into debt trying to meet her demands, and then somehow her friend ended up buying the property for $30,000 under asking price just days after the sale fell through." As Officer Morris was explaining Debbie's history, I noticed movement in an upstairs window of the house across the street. Debbie was standing there, watching our conversation, with this smug expression on her face, like she'd just won some kind of victory. When she saw me looking, she actually had the nerve to wave at me with this fake sweet smile. The audacity was breathtaking. Officer Morris followed my gaze and spotted her too. "She's probably expecting me to make you tear down that fence," he said with a chuckle. "Sorry to disappoint her, but there's absolutely nothing illegal about what you've built here." After Officer Morris left, I decided to go live on my channel to address what had just happened. I set up the camera fence fully in frame and hit record. "Hey everyone, you're not going to believe what just happened," I began, trying to keep my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. "Someone in my neighborhood just called the police on me for building this fence. The officer confirmed that everything is completely legal and up to code, but I wanted to address this situation directly with you all." Within minutes, I had over 200 viewers, and the comments were exploding with support and outrage on my behalf. That's when things got really interesting. Right in the middle of my live stream, Debbie stormed across my lawn again, this time vibrating with fury. She planted herself directly in front of my camera and started yelling, "Turn that thing off right now. You can't film me without my permission." The irony of her demanding privacy while standing uninvited on my property wasn't lost on my viewers, who were having an absolute field day in the comments. "Ma'am, you're on my property," I said as calmly as I could manage, "and this is a public live stream. If you don't want to be filmed, you're welcome to leave." But Debbie wasn't backing down. "This is harassment," she shrieked, pointing at my camera. "You're making me look like the villain here." The chat was chaos. Unhinged might have been the word of the day. She's making herself look bad. Team Claire all the way. This lady is unhinged. I tried to de-escalate the situation by explaining that I was just sharing my gardening content with my subscribers, but Debbie was having none of it. "I know who you are now," she said, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper that my microphone still picked up, "and I know exactly how to deal with people like you." After Debbie finally stomped off, I wrapped up the live stream, but not before the viewer count had climbed to over 400 people. The clip of her meltdown was already being screen recorded and shared by my subscribers. I knew this was just the beginning of what was going to be a much larger battle. That night, as I was reviewing the security camera footage from the day, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The timestamp showed Debbie creeping around my garden at 2 a.m, just hours before she called the police. She had a spray bottle in her hand and was clearly doing something to my plants. What was she up to now? When I reviewed the security footage the next morning, my worst fears were confirmed. The night vision cameras had captured Debbie clear as day, sneaking around my garden at 2 a.m. with a spray bottle full of what looked suspiciously like herbicide. She'd systematically sprayed several of my prized tomato plants and my entire row of lettuce. The footage was crystal clear. There was no denying what she'd done. It was like watching your job go up in smoke. These plants weren't just crops. They were my career, my joy, and my whole plan. I immediately called Officer Morris to report the vandalism. He arrived within an hour and watched the footage with the grim expression of someone who'd seen this pattern before. "This is criminal mischief," he said, making notes in his report. "We're talking about deliberate destruction of property. I'll need copies of this footage for evidence." By morning, leaves had curled and turned yellow. The damage was clear. But instead of wallowing in despair, I decided to channel my anger into action. I set up my camera in the garden and started recording what would become one of my most watched videos ever. "Good morning, everyone," I began, gesturing to the dying plants behind me. "I want to share something with you that happened in my garden last night. This isn't just about gardening anymore. This is about what happens when someone decides they can destroy other people's property just because they don't like a fence." I showed my viewers the security footage, being careful to narrate exactly what they were seeing without making any accusations I couldn't prove. The clip blew up. In hours, the view count skyrocketed, and so did the outrage. My subscribers were absolutely outraged on my behalf. "This is beyond cruel," one comment read. "How can someone destroy a garden? That's like destroying art." Another viewer wrote, "You need to press charges immediately. This woman is completely out of line." The support was overwhelming, and suddenly, the comments filled with other HOA nightmares. It seemed like Debbie's behavior was part of a much larger pattern of abuse that homeowners associations were inflicting on people across the country. My friend Madeline came over that afternoon to survey the damage and help me figure out my next steps. Madeline and I had been friends since college, and she worked as a paralegal at a local law firm, so she had a good understanding of property law and tenant rights.